And I'm the chair of the first session of the festival. But it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sarah, the very Reverend Dr. Sarah Rowland-Jones, who is going to open the St. David's Festival of Ideas. A few words about Sarah, very impressive biography. She has been the Dean of St. David's for nearly 3 years and an Anglican priest for over 20 years. Ordained in the church in Wales, she has also served in the Anglican Church in Southern Africa. Before that, she was a British diplomat for 15 years, which included postings in Jordan and in Hungary. And she can actually speak a bit of Hungarian as well, actually quite a lot of Hungarian. Her doctorate in the philosophy of religion had the short title, Doing God in Public, and reflected her concern that Christians should play an active and constructive role in a pluralist world. Through engagement, Christians should contribute constructively to the shaping of moral, rational societies in which individuals can flourish, within flourishing communities, or living sustainably within our world. So the dialogues and conversations of this Festival of Ideas are right up her street. Gives me great pleasure to hand over to Sarah for her opening remarks about the festival.
Thank you, Sue, and noswaith dda a chroeso I gyd. It's absolutely my tremendous joy to be able to give these opening remarks, to introduce this festival weekend. It's been quite a long time coming. I was roped in when we had the big sort of discussion quasi-launch in the Ysgol Penrhyn Dewi here in St David's, well, 18 months or so ago now. And I must admit that the whole concept really grabbed me, that we in St David's should have a festival of ideas. I love the idea of festival, that sense of celebrating together, having a good time, sharing ideas. Although it isn't just going to be about just chewing the fat together. I hope that we won't just talk the talk, but it will help us to walk the walk. And St David's itself was a really wonderful place to launch this festival from, because the peninsula has a remarkable history, as we know from the Bronze Age ruins. But even if I think obviously rooted in the cathedral, from the time of St Dewi onwards, nowadays people think of us as being the far, 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 far back of beyond, the uttermost westerly point of Wales. But actually, if we go back to the 6th century, and for many centuries before and after that, we were not quite the Pont Abraham of the medieval world, but certainly the maritime motorways were the place to be, the connectedness that we had with the rest of the world through those centuries when sea travel was so much quicker and safer than going over land. So we were certainly, from St David's time, a place where the ideas and the influence could flow from. Nowadays, it tends to be that the rest of the world comes to us, if not quite under lockdown, but certainly we expect to return before too long to that capacity to welcome people from all over the world. And what we want to do is welcome them into a place where we have a community that is committed to the well-being of all of us. And that's what the ideas are going to be about that we're sharing this weekend. As I've said on the little video that many of you will have seen on the front page of the website, asking the big questions about the meaning of life is something that's very dear to the heart of most faith traditions, but actually is something that all of us can share. For me, I like to look back to the words of Jesus, who in John's Gospel is reported as saying that he came that we might have life in abundance. What does it mean to have abundant life? Or as St. David said, be joyful, byddwch lawen, cadwch eich ffydd, keep your faith, a gwnewch y pethau bachau, do the little things. What does it mean to have abundant life, to live joyfully, not just that sort of, I think it's something far more fundamental than just happiness. but that deep sense of well-being, of living optimistically, of having true, tangible hope for ourselves, for those we love, for future generations. Keeping the faith by living with integrity, being able to have a sense of authenticity in who we are individually and together, to be rooted in all that is good and true and faithful and just. And in the little things, to be able to keep our word, to hold one another to account, to draw out the best in one another. And these are the sort of ideas that we're going to be tossing around this weekend. It seems to me that every culture, every generation, freshly, in each time and place, has to ask what it means to flourish for ourselves here and now. I often look back to other words of Jesus who talked about the way to live, the two great commandments, to love God with heart and soul and mind and strength, and to live in love with your neighbor. And it seems to me that these encapsulate the sort of the dimensions of what it truly is for us to be to be human beings and living well. Our heart, that we have an emotional life. Our soul, that we have a spiritual life. Our minds, that the intellectual, but we can also think perhaps about mental health. And with all our strength is our physical embodiment, our bodies, our health, that part of well-being. But also, I suppose you could think of as our material being, and things like the economy and finances and all that goes with that. But we might also think of that strength as being our physical embodiment within the world and our relationship with natural resources and the stewardship and care of creation all around us. And then there's neighbors, because all of us are individuals who are also members of communities. We are neither totally subsumed by community, nor are we totally individualistic, separate from community. And so for me, that gives me a sort of a Christian lens, and others will bring their own lens on all these different perspectives from which we need to look at and measure our lives. And whenever policies come out, we can say, who does it enrich? Who does it impoverish in relation to our mental, emotional, spiritual, embodied well-being, as well as just the finances? What are the effects on communities of proposals that come from local government, national government? How do we decide what we should be doing to shape our future? And of course, even though we can do that in every generation, the COVID pandemic has made some of those questions much more stark. Sometimes it has stripped away some of the things that we've taken for granted about our life. There are things which we desperately miss, things that we realize are far more central to healthy living than we perhaps had understood previously. But in other ways, we may also have found that there are things that we've been quite glad to let go of, to see the back of. Or perhaps it's just been that sense of the sharp, stark light of all the challenges of the last year, which have thrown into sharper relief where true value lies, what really matters, what has lasting worth. And so often, as we found particularly in relation to key workers, it isn't actually very well correlated with the things which have large price tags attached to them. What do we truly value? And as we go forward, are we going to actually live out our lives in a way that reflects what we believe those true values are? The government has its slogan of Build Back Better, and we've actually used that a little around the cathedral. But as I've been pondering it, I think I want to change it in a couple of ways. Instead of building, I think I'd like to look at the word growth, that sense of something much more rooted and something much more organic. And I think sense of rootedness and that nourishing of a growing, sustaining concept is something that perhaps will come up in various different contexts over the next 24 hours or so. And then it's not so much back as forward. I think we look back to recognize where we've come from, as someone says, the rear view mirror is much smaller than the windscreen when you're driving, and it's what's ahead that should engage us rather more. And so over the next day or so, we will be looking from all these various different perspectives. The array of talks that we have is utterly remarkable, and we have some wonderful speakers. And I'd like to say a huge thank you to those who are with us now as we gather and launch the weekend. But if you stay with us and come along to the various talks, follow on Facebook if you didn't manage to sign up to an Eventbrite ticket, because I think everybody should be there, and Pat, who is doing the tech, will keep us all going. So that is really something that we can look forward to. But I'd like to say also thank you to, at this point, to all the volunteers, people who've given time and energy and effort and a huge amount of work that's gone in behind the scenes. We first thought we were going to be doing this about a year ago, and then we looked at the autumn, and now we decided it's not worth waiting any longer. We should have this, and we should do it through the joy of all the new opportunities that Zoom and connectedness allow for us. And I know from the chat function that there are people from all around the world who probably wouldn't be able to participate if we had been in the physical world. So all of this, it's a real joy to be here. We're running on an absolute shoestring, so here's the advert. If you'd like to donate and support the continuing life of the festival, please go to the website and do make a donation to help us as we take these ideas forward. Because, as I said earlier, it's not just a talking shop, fun though that is for many of us, but actually we need not just to talk the talk, we need to walk the walk. And the true purpose of this weekend is that we should be able to unpack the issues that face us as we prepare to go forward from the pandemic, and that we should find ways, all of us, to be part of the solutions and not part of the problems of the world. So being small at Sir David's allows us to be nimble. We have so many opportunities before us. So may St. David help us to be joyful, to keep the faith and do the little things. Byddwch lawen, cadwch eich ddydd, a gwnewch y pethau bychain. And may we be blessed in our weekend together, and through our weekend, may we become a blessing to those around us, to the community, to all who visit and beyond. Thank you very much indeed. And let me hand back now to Sue and to Mollie for our first session, which is about self-sustaining communities and the experiences and insights of Solva Care.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah, for introducing the festival with such inspirational words. You've set the scene for all the great themes and perspectives that we will be covering, and many of your words certainly resonate with our presentation, which is to follow now. Thank you very much indeed. A warm welcome then, everybody, those of you who've just joined us. I can see that people are still trickling in. It's with great pleasure that Mollie and I are giving the first talk of the festival, a talk about communities of place and well-being. And what better place to give our presentations than this beautiful corner of Wales, where community spirit and community power are so strong, and if anything, getting even stronger. Mollie is the star attraction here, but she has kindly invited me to talk a little bit about communities and well-being in general terms to set the context for her talk about Solva Care. We're going to talk for a maximum of 20 minutes, and at which point I will take questions from the question and answer box. I can see that the chat function is open as well, so it would really help me if you use the question and answer session rather than the chat box, so I can actually look at those that I will put to Mollie to answer. And also please use that function to make any points or comments that you'd like to make. I will read out as many as I can before we wrap up at 10 to 7. So just to kick off then, I would find it really difficult to talk about communities without touching on the pandemic. So I'm going to start with a question around the term silver lining, a term that is increasingly used in connection with the dreadful crisis that has engulfed us over the past year. So is it possible for there to be a silver lining in all that has happened over the past year? Is it possible to find any good? I expect that the enthusiasm with which many would answer that question with a yes will be largely shaped by personal experience and how bad that has been. Illness or loss of life among family members, friends, acquaintances, the loss of jobs and livelihoods, anxiety and fear about the future, and the impact on the education of children and young people and the negative effects on their mental health. And being shocked by the stark inequalities that exist in the UK, highlighted by and made much worse by the pandemic. There are, however, some positive and encouraging things that have happened. People have been really quick to pull together at a time of crisis to be neighbourly, to befriend, support and provide food. This demonstration of the inherent goodness in people has been a comfort coming at a time when polarised views and divisions in society were so evident, and some would argue remain so. The workforce in our public services have gone that extra mile to cope, despite pressures which were exacerbated by the 10 years of austerity. And they've worked collaboratively, freed from bureaucracy, to provide a coordinated response to those in need. And then there are the individuals and groups of volunteers in neighbourhoods, localities, cities that have been quick to adapt and respond to provide support and protect their populations. Their activities have been very effective in taking pressure off services too. It is this crucial role in prevention that has placed communities centre stage as society starts to reflect on what the future should look like, what needs to change and improve, the so-called new normal. I hope that you agree with me that we do not need a pandemic to prove that communities are the principal creators of health and well-being, of opportunities and resilience. But that seems to me what has happened. In communities of place or geography, the social connectedness between people, the quality of housing, access to services, transport, leisure activities, the local economy, the quality of the environment, all interact in complex ways to determine how we feel and what we do that we think is worthwhile. Rurality adds an extra dimension to the challenges in addressing those determinants. Communities are definitely best placed to know what they need, and it follows, therefore, that they should have a say in the policies that affect them. That needs a change in the dynamic between communities and the state at all levels, national and local. It needs the strengthening of local democratic engagement for decision-making and resources to make that engagement meaningful. In essence, what I'm talking about here is increased community power and power sharing, maintaining the advances we have made during the pandemic and building on it to strengthen and sustain communities. I'm pleased to say that in Pembrokeshire, we have made impressive progress on this agenda, helped by the Together for Change programme, created by Solva Care in partnership with the social enterprise Planed and PAVS, the Pembrokeshire Association of Voluntary Services. Our three organisations are working with communities, enlightened managers in the NHS and Pembrokeshire County Council, and a key group of county councillors who really get it, who really want to achieve change. A 10-point plan for community health and wealth building is taking shape that is being produced jointly to reinforce that it is owned by all. It places the citizen and communities at the centre of a strategy that is evidence-based, social and green. Together for Change partners feel really strongly that the future lies in cooperation and collaboration on many issues across localities, further boosting community power and effectiveness. And Solva Care is playing a key part in that by coordinating, networking and sharing learning and resources. And two of our workers are here with us tonight, Jessie Buchanan and Maria Jones, who are working hard on that agenda. This mentioning Solva Care brings me a good point at which to hand over to Mollie Roach. Mollie was a community counsellor when she started to think about setting up Solva Care and wrote many of us in the community to get it started and run it. So it was truly created for the community by the community. We are fortunate to have a proactive, energetic community council, which has been very supportive and from which many good ideas flow. But it's under Mollie's leadership that Solva Care has gone from strength to strength. And I'd like to hand over to Mollie now.
Thank you very much, Sue. Hello, everybody. The Ideas Festival is about ideas, but it is intended that the ideas will bring about change. And my interest is in how we do that, what change is and how it comes about, and what it means for those it affects. What kind of a society do we need to enable change to flourish? What kind of a society rejects change and tries to prevent it? How long does change last? When does the new become the normal? When does the normal become the fixed? When does the fixed become unchangeable? We have made a change in Solva at a local level, and I'm proposing tonight to use what we did as an example, a kind of a piece of action research to suggest possibly at least some of the answers, and at least, if not suggesting answers, starting the discussion. For those of you who don't know Solva, and there will be many who don't, we're on the Welsh side of the Landsker. We're about 3 miles out of St. David's. It's a small coastal village, really small. There's very little spare space. We are almost entirely dependent on tourism. There are 480 houses in the community, and about between a third and a quarter of those houses are empty for most of the year because they are holiday homes. There's about 700 on our electoral roll, and 40%, probably more than 40% now, of that 700 are over 65. We have many retirees, both local and from away. People have come here to retire. Our younger people go away to find work. Got lots of really good assets, physical assets, the church, the surgery, the bus service, post office. We've just about still got a school. We've got a hall and pubs and so on. We've got social assets, the kind of social assets that many small rural communities have got. I would class our community council as one of our big social assets, and also the community itself, the trust there is in the community, its inclusivity, its willingness to help, its rejection of dependency and of being patronized. There are clubs and societies and a newsletter, and we are willing to assess our community and do what we can to improve it, to make things better. We know that we can't do it all, and we need to work with others, and working with others is not always easy. Especially, we need to work with the statutory sector, which does what it can, but has difficulty in being flexible, in dealing with the one-offs, the non-routine, the individual, the kind of people that we are dealing with in Solva Care. We knew that we needed change, but we found it very difficult to do. We did a community survey and drew up an action plan, and 10 years later, in 2008, we did another community survey and we drew up another action plan, and it was much the same as the one we'd done 10 years before. Hardly anything had changed. At the public meeting which followed the 2008 survey, we decided that we needed to take action ourselves if we were to make change happen. If we really wanted change, we would have to do it ourselves. One of the areas we earmarked for action was care of the elderly. Our research showed that the situation wasn't good and was likely to get worse. The increase, the big increase in the number of pensions that there were is dramatically illustrated. In 2000, across the UK, for every pensioner, there were 19 people in work, 19 people paying tax and paying their national insurance to help with those pensioners. 10 years later, in 2010, there were only 4 people in work for every pensioner there was. That's not because there was a huge number of people out of work, it's because there were more pensioners. Clearly, a crisis on its way. In addition, cuts were being made, and rural areas such as Pembrokeshire were feeling the pinch of those cuts. At that time, as Sue said, I was a community councillor, and my responsibilities on the community council were health and education. I was asked to do some research into the local situation, and at that time, our county had 27 care agencies, and they were running a kind of a competition for cases. Care homes were closing, and there were no homes near Solva anyway. Older people wanted to stay in their own homes. And at that time, in our national press, there were a lot of cases of abuse. And there was a lot of fuss and bother about what was happening in council homes and indeed in people's own homes. There was, curiously, no duty on local authorities to inspect reported abuse. And locally, those who didn't qualify for subsidised care paid for it or employed private carers, some of whom were trained and some of whom were not trained. Agencies didn't want to come to Solva. They said, it's not worth it just for one case. If you give us all the cases in Solva, we'll come, but otherwise we won't come. Care packages don't include social care, only domiciliary care. And there was very little liaison between the social care available and the domiciliary care. Older people simply faded out of the picture. They took part less and less, they dropped out of community life, they lost and the community lost. We wanted to change that, and we began to consider the idea of starting our own care agency, employing and training local people to do the domiciliary care work and using local volunteers to fill in the social gaps, offering a fully integrated service, Solva Care. I did more research to find other such projects to learn from them, and there were none. I did a discussion paper and reported it to council, and we agreed to go to the community with the idea. We devised a questionnaire explaining the idea and asking what people thought about it. We had a section for those receiving care. How much care do you have? Who gives it you? What does it cost you? When does it come? And we had a section for those who needed care but weren't receiving it. We also had a section for everyone to answer where you could volunteer and put any comments that you got. We got an 85% return on our questionnaire. The results were analysed. I did another discussion paper for Community Council, and we went to Community Council, went to a decision, and then we had a public meeting. All the time that was going on, I was doing the research. The CSSIW, the Care Council for Wales, the Welsh Assembly Government, the County Council, you name the organisation, I was there saying what we were intending to do and being told there's no way you'll be able to do it. I read all the policy documents, all the strategy documents there were, and I looked at other care schemes that were operating in the UK, not in the way that we were proposing, but there was nothing that was of real help to us. And it seemed to me that it would be impossible for us to set up a care company providing domiciliary care. And what it boils down to is that the rules are too inflexible. There is too much money needed. The policy and the system, it is simply not suited to small local units, however efficient and responsive, and Solva was much too small. Community Council considered the research and we decided to go for social care only. We got local volunteers and we were going to seek integration with domiciliary care, working with the agencies. We wanted to pay a coordinator. I'd looked at voluntary schemes that were going locally and nationally, and they tended to be short-term, and we did not want to be short-term, we wanted to be long-term. Our questionnaire had provided us with a list of people who were receiving help, a list of those who were needing help, a list of people willing to be volunteers, and lots of ideas. We got our funding for the first 2 years from the national parks. We appointed our coordinator, and in July of 2015, our coordinator met with the volunteers. We'd got, at that time, just about 30. We've never had less than 30 volunteers, and we usually between 30 and 40. They were all trained. They were all DBS checked. They get a lot out of it. Friendships form, helpers merge with those we help. And the numbers are helpful because it prevents dependency and it helps to avoid personality clashes. Cases built up, an increasing number of hours per week were volunteered, and we were on our way. We had made a change. We've now been going for 6 years, and the change continues as we respond to the need. We always recruit locally and advertise locally. For the first 2 years, we were a subcommittee of our community council. And then someone told us we were operating illegally. You can't be a subcommittee of your community council, raising money and running a fund. So now we are a charity with a trustee board. The council is represented on our trustee board, and we are represented at community council. And what do? Simply answered, we respond to individual need. We try to improve well-being, we take a holistic approach, and our aim is to get people back into the community. Activity sessions, shopping, walks, you name it, we do it. And if we can't do it, Lena, our coordinator, will find someone who can do it. She's an information hub for the whole of the community. We have a drop-in session for 2 hours on Friday mornings at the surgery. We work closely with the hospital, with social services, and with the third sector. And we're working now using direct payments to try to get local people to start up mini enterprises as carers. People hear about us and they ask us for talks, they ask us what we are doing, they ask about our toolkit that we've prepared. And we know that different circumstances mean different approaches. You may or may not have a hall or a surgery or a shop. You may be spread over a wide area or in a series of small hamlets, but it is still true that the local community can work together to deliver what is needed and can usually do it more quickly and more effectively than statutory provision. Witness the many local groups that started up in response to COVID. We are working currently to support groups seeking to bring about change in their community. So change has happened at a local level where it makes a difference. Local monitoring tells us that people are able to stay home, they are more confident, they feel better, they know where they go for help, they feel reassured because it's local, there are fewer admissions to hospital. We have, if you have to go to hospital, you can come home more quickly if you're coming back to Solva. Well-being has improved, our volunteers are confident, they feel more part of the community, and everybody in the community is more knowledgeable for their own future. The whole community feels better about itself. New projects are starting all the time. And as for what we've learned, the whole process was and is a learning process. We applied the lessons as we went along, and we learned above all that you can do it yourself. Indeed, you have to do it yourself. No one else can do it for you. First, involve the community, keep them involved, inform them, ask for help, and golden advice, ask, don't tell. Second, stay local and stay small. Quality comes first. Quantity and time and money all matter, but it is quality that makes the difference. And there's nearly always a way around that, no, you can't do that reaction that you get often when you go for help. Be flexible, accept change, be risk aware, not risk averse. Do what is needed and don't back off. Look to the future, see what's coming and prepare for it. How can we keep going? Importantly, don't think in silos. The elderly, the vulnerable, the disabled, them, the others, not us. This is a community thing. We're in it together. One day we are helping, the next day you need help. We are not experts. We are the community and we know what works for us. How does change come about? What part do working projects like Solva Care, locally based, meeting local need, play in determining change? where do policy and research fit in? At a national level, policymakers have to make choices in order to bring about change across the country. What should the choices be based on? What are the drivers for change, and how do we get to the new normal? And what will it be like? And how long will it last? And above all, who will benefit from it? Thank you for listening. Questions and comments are welcome. Sue will field them.
Thank you very much indeed, Molly. You've painted a sort of exciting journey there that was full of challenges and highs and lows, but we got there in the end. Please put your questions into the question and answer box, or in fact, if it's easier for you, the chat boxes. I've got both open. So Molly, I've got a couple of interesting questions here for you. The first one is about the specific challenges for rural populations. So what are they, and how does Solva Care address them?
Generally speaking, I would say that the specific challenges were those were the ones that no person living in a rural area would oppose. It is the question of distance, and it is the question of the lack of facilities, the lack of the bus route, the distance from hospital, the difficulty of getting to the surgery. It's those kinds of particular points. In Solva, we are fortunate because it's a very small contained community, but many rural communities have suffered from the closure of the school, the ceasing of the bus service, the doctor's surgery being, say, 10, 12 miles away in the local town. Many small local communities have become dormitories, houses with people sleeping in them and people going off to work. It's a question of attempting to keep the community together, to give the community a feeling of the identity of the community so that they can work together to benefit from it. It seems to me it's those kind of factors that militate against many rural communities doing much, and of course they severely lack money.
Yeah, I think an important point as well is that communities differ greatly in the assets that they have.
Yeah, indeed.
And quite often people, talk about the Solva Care model and whether it can be scaled up. And it's not the issue of scaling up, it's every community doing whatever is suitable to it, whatever they want to do with whatever assets they have. We're quite fortunate in that respect, aren't we?
Oh yeah, we were fortunate in Solva because our community council was so willing to be involved and helped very much. Certainly in those first 2 years when we were operating, and in many communities the community council isn't even, so to speak, sort of close to the local community. It is in another area of the actual the community itself. So it might be a group of people who say, we need this, we need to make a change here, and they don't have the community at large with them. We are fortunate in Solva that it's a small self-contained community, but I still maintain that these things are best done at a community level, and my interest lies in what change is effected, what the changes that are effected at community level, witness the ones that came about as the result of COVID, how those can be fostered and encouraged and supported when change itself comes at the top, comes from Cardiff or from Westminster. And as it filters down, it becomes weaker and weaker and weaker until by the time it gets to your doorstep, it's lost all its effectiveness and the money has been allocated further up the line.
Right. Thank you for that. Thank you for that question, Jessie. I have one here from Gerard, who says, very interesting, how secure is your future funding? Do the main funding bodies for health and social care recognise your value and support you in return?
Really good question. Yeah. I could have fed you that question and asked you to ask it. The answer is the statutory services, the regional health board, our county council, our local health board, they are all aware of the work that we are doing. And we work with, on a day-to-day basis, we work with the social services people, with hospitals and so on. As I said, they know that our financial situation is totally dependent on grant funding. And they know that in our opinion, it ought not to be. We feel that since we are fulfilling we are in a certain extent, at any rate, supporting and fulfilling a statutory function, we should be receiving finances for that. The answer to the question of how we are financially situated at the moment, we are 2 years into a 5-year grant from the National Lottery Fund. When that finishes in 3 years' time, and we're starting now to look at where we might get future funding from, then if we are unable to get future funding, Solva Care will stop, because the basis of our organisation in Solva itself is that we pay our coordinator and we pay for clerical and financial support. And that being so, we need those salaries, and we need a small amount to cover the activities that we run. So we do need that funding. And to my mind, the more community groups who adopt a similar sort of line, the more community groups who become involved in supporting their own communities and doing work for themselves, the better that would be for us, because the more we are able to say to the county council and to the local health board, it's not just one small place with 700 people living in it. There's a whole lot of people doing this, and it is worth your while to support us.
Thank you. A question from Ian, to both of us actually. Are you both hopeful for the future and that things will not go back to the old way of doing things? And I think he's referring to communities being involved in decision making, in the future, and what we've heard about Solva Care and that Solva Care has managed to do. So I'll let you kick off with that, Mollie. Do you think the new era of partnership working is going to persist, or will we go back to our old ways?
One of the things that has seemed to me to be a positive coming out of the COVID thing is a much greater awareness of the resources there are in local communities. Certainly in Pembrokeshire, and presumably in other areas also, the immediate reaction was in communities. Before the county council or the health board or whatever were able to get themselves organised, community groups had started up and were offering shopping and were offering good neighbour things and so on. And I think over 90 were formed in Pembrokeshire alone. That suggests to me that there is a willingness on the part of communities to pick up the torch, so to speak, and to run with it, and to become active in that, in helping their communities to respond to crises and to respond just to ordinary situations. But looking at what is happening with regard to funding, and looking at the likelihood of funding being yet more cuts in response to the borrowing of money that's been going on, it is difficult to see a great deal of money being available. And even with the best will in the world, a small amount of money is necessary. We are accustomed to the notion that we would be approached, we would be asked our opinion, we will give our opinion, it will go forward, and that will be the last we hear of it.
I think my answer would be that I'm hopeful that we're not going to go back to our old ways. I think part of it, the changes are resource driven, that resources will be in short supply. But also I think that there are enough enlightened people in the services, statutory services, that believe that the way of the future is for services to be pushed down to local level and for local people to have much more of a say in the decision making. I think the challenge for us will be that, in some communities where you don't have a formal or informal group existing currently, the community council might not be, as active as ours is, or they don't have the same connections with their community. Where is the focal point for local democratic decisions to be made? Yeah. So I think that there's an onus on the Welsh Government to encourage local democratic structures, you know, at locality level. They undertook a survey in 2018 that showed that it was patchy across Wales, and that patchiness was determined by, you know, the lack of resources and the lack of expertise in some councils to actually participate in strategic decision making. So I think there's quite a bit to be done, but I feel that there is a momentum at the moment, and that momentum is strong enough to succeed in the future. I've had a question from Evan. Evan, yes, all this is available on the Solva Care website. Mollie, can we put your notes on the website as well?
Yes,
So
yes, sure, yeah.
it was difficult for some people to make notes as we both rattled through the presentation.
I was wanting to get to the questions.
So Evan, please look out for the notes being put on the Solva Care website. I'm not sure whether Maria is on in this session still, but perhaps Maria could put the web address on in the chat box if that's possible, or Jessie, please. I'd like to, yeah, that's an interesting question from David. What can central and local government do to ensure that your visionary work becomes sustainable? I'm going to hand that over to you, Mollie, so that we are looking at that question from the point of view of a formal social support organisation.
We've talked about this in Solva Care with the trustees and indeed with members of the community. A whole variety of ideas. Money tends to be always in my mind, the notion of the funding and so on, and our conversations often tend to be about the difficulty of obtaining the money and the least amount of money that we would need in order to conduct our business. I think county councils, statutory services could help in that. Much of our admin and our finance support could come centrally from the county council. Some of the organisations, for some communities, which unlike Solva, which is a very close community, the houses are close together, we can walk to each other's places and so on. For other much more scattered communities, it's a different kind of problem because they are more scattered. There is no centre. It's not so easy to actually contact a central person and say, you have an effect, you are known right across. Most people in Solva know the other people in Solva. That is not so in many rural communities. So the notion of how national government and local government can support the rural communities, it's an interesting one. One of the things that certainly they could do to good effect, I think, would be to remove from community and town councils the notion that it doesn't really much matter what they do because all the decisions are taken much higher up, and no attention is really paid to local community and town councils. It's a kind of a self-defeating prophecy. You've got to say to yourself, no, we can operate ourselves. We can do it for ourselves.
Okay, Mollie, I'm going to have to stop there because the organisers have been signalling to me that we've got to wrap up. There were a lot of really interesting questions. I'm sorry I wasn't able to cover all of them. In fact, I've tried to respond in writing in the question and answer boxes to some of your questions, but unfortunately we've run out of time. Thank you very much indeed, Mollie, for that really excellent presentation. Just a couple of words in the minutes that we've got left. I'd like to thank you all very, very much for coming and for putting your thoughts to us in the form of questions and comments in the chat box as well. Really appreciate them. I'd like to thank the committee of St David's and Solva who started the festival, Ivor Thomas, Amanda Stone, Patrick Nash, John Osborne. These are volunteers who are doing this work completely, voluntarily, and they would really welcome some donations, that I think Sarah has already made a plug for that. So we look forward to seeing you hopefully next year in person at the festival, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thank you very, very much for coming to this. All the very best. Bye-bye.